Hello and good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending on what time zone you're in right now, and welcome to COP30 Covered. This is a brand new daily podcast show from Edie, the UK's longest standing and biggest sustainable business media brand. Hopefully many of you listening will be familiar with us for our long-standing monthly podcast, Sustainability Uncovered. That's all about rounding up the biggest stories in corporate sustainability with a host of special guests. But as the name of this new limited series suggests, COP30 Covered sees us covering the UN's climate summit in Belém in November 2025. We are breaking the biggest news stories, simplifying the complicated discussion points, and hopefully having some fun along the way. Sadly, we're not on the ground for this year's COP, but each day we're dialing a host of guest experts who are to give us a real flavour of the COP and to simplify what's going on. It is Friday the 7th of November 2025 and you're listening to the voice of Edie's content editor Sarah George. Joining me in this virtual studio for this episode are our editor Matt Mace.
Hello again.
And our senior reporter Sidhi Mittal.
Hello.
Yep, how are you both? How has the start of the COP been treating you? I see Sidhi's got her microphone raring to go. I'll start with her.
I wasn't expecting the World Leader Summit to be this busy with what's coming out of it so far that we have seen. But it was actually a good thing. So it's been really busy, but at the same time we have had the SBTi publish their second consultation on the net zero standard. So that has been keeping, I think, all of us pretty busy across the news desk as well. So yeah, I think it's been busy, fair to say.
Yeah, I've also got that sort of 1 foot in the normal Edie day job and then 1 foot in the COPs. I held the launch initiative for our 30 under 30 this year, which was great. We're convening 30 young sustainability professionals and energy managers in London for that one. And as Sidhi mentioned, also working on the SBTi coverage as well. So all of that is on our site. And in this, I do think that Matt was squirreling away on some news coverage and a newsletter.
Yeah, so we kicked off our first newsletter for members, which just kind of summarises everything we're doing. It's a one-stop shop for our COP30 content, whether that's the podcast, which you will all be listening to now, our kind of daily roundups, which aren't quite ready yet until the kind of official COP starts, which is on Monday. But for the Heads of State Summit or World Leaders Summit, whatever you want to call it, it's more to do with just who's been there, who's been saying what. Obviously, Keir Starmer was there talking through the UK's approach to climate action. Heard from Brazil President as well, European Commission President as well, fresh off of their kind of weakening of their 2040 target. Prince William's been out there for a shot, so quite a few kind of people from the outset. I suppose even from the outside looking in, it feels like the familiar faces, certainly what we've seen in the coverage, and perhaps less kind of prominent coverage to different voices, although I think the presidents of Chile and Colombia, obviously those South American countries, have had a bit more prominence in their voice, which is good, and have been quite punchy as well. There's been lots of shots fired at the kind of absentees in the room, which maybe I'll touch upon in a bit later.
Yeah, for sure. So we can get into the World Leaders Summit in a minute and who said what. Sidhi said there's been quite a lot of big announcements, and probably the biggest one being that nations have committed to putting $5.5 billion total into a new tropical forest forever facility, which will incentivize forest-rich nations and regions to preserve these ecosystems. So it combats some of the financial incentives that currently exist for deforestation. So this is a real focus point for Brazil going there, but the UK and Starmer caught a lot of flack for not putting into that fund so far. As Matt said, Sidhi, Starmer is there though, trying to talk a good story about what the UK is doing. I know that you've been going through his speech in full, so for our listeners, what has he been talking about?
I mean, obviously one of the most anticipated speeches, I think, of the day. And from what I've seen from Green Group reaction, everybody was quite content with him flagging, just how important it is 10 years from the Paris Agreement and we're almost close to crossing 1.5C from what we heard from scientists recently. So he pointed that out, and he also made the case of how the climate crisis is linked to so many other crises that we're seeing at present, so like the growing migration flows, more and more extreme weather events, flooding, drought across the world, rising food prices, growing threats to national security. So he linked all of them together. And then he also mentioned that what he has seen in the past few months is that the cross-party consensus that was there once in the UK on climate action is gone now, in his words. And, some parties are arguing that there isn't time to act on climate change right now. There are other crises that are unfolding at the minute. So I think, the main bit was linking it all together and bringing the attention back to how climate crisis is kind of responsible for all of these other crises that people are highlighting. And then he also mentioned NDCs and the importance of the NDCs. So the UK submitted its NDC earlier this year, and Prime Minister Starmer urged other leaders to do the same as well, and to try to help deliver the Paris Agreement in full, which is 1.5C aim still there. A lot was said, but I think at the end of the day, the focus was on how a collective actions needed to tackle the challenges that everybody's facing across the world.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting from a man who, until literally a few days ago, wasn't going, and the depth of the speech compared to what the EU leader, Ursula von der Leyen, had to say was really interesting. She was sort of on and off in literally about 2 minutes. So, yeah, some super interesting stuff from Europe. Matt, I think you said you wanted to come back to some of the other people who were there and what they said as well.
Yeah. I think, as mentioned, it's kind of just been highlighting who's not in the room as much as who is in the room. We kind of get a taste for these kind of global openers now. You get the UNFCCC kind of really sounding this alarm bell for humanity, and we've got coverage of their quotes again, all kind of really strong stuff. But aside from that, I think the kind of big story has been how unified the countries in the room have been in kind of, I don't want to say taking shots, but kind of taking shots at President Trump and the US. And I should point out, it's not to say the US aren't going to be involved in these discussions. They're not sending any high level kind of representatives, but I think there's like going to be 100+ representatives from kind of regional, local cities there out in Brazil, and maybe even more fresh off the back of these kind of latest Democratic wins in mayoral and governor elections that have happened this week. But it has been quite interesting to kind of see them take shots across the line. I think it was Colombian President Gustavo Petro kind of said that it's against humanity by the US and Donald Trump not being there. One of his quotes was, "Oblivion is the worst punishment," which is a hell of a quote. But to that, I would say that actually the worst punishment is having to comb through the actual UN documents at the end of COP and seeing all the changes, because that is quite tedious and laborious, which we will all have to do in 2 weeks' time. But it has been a little bit kind of, maybe catty is the right word. Very kind of Mean Girls burn book, but rather than the whole score, it's all just aimed at kind of the US and Donald Trump about him not being there so far. So there's some great kind of sound bites, and I do think diplomacy maybe needs this more kind of frank aspects about being let down by, what is one of the three kind of biggest polluters as a country. And obviously China Prime Minister's now out there. They've sent delegation out there as well. So it's kind of a real mismatch of kind of emotions. There's the need to respond to these big reports from, hottest year on records, the emissions gap report, and there's kind of almost using that as this kind of motivator to kind of really up action. I know Sidhi covered the NDC report that came out and shows how off track we are there, and there's a bit of frustration there, and it's kind of turning towards hope, or kind of that's where this needs to head to really. Whether that does through the instruments that Brazil and Belgium and COP30 will focus on and try to deliver, it's going to be a tall order.
Got it. And I think it's important that you say, cattiness and frankness. Let's just bear in mind that Donald Trump is never afraid to be catty or frank, or to take 2 hours of someone's time when he's meant to have 20 minutes on stage. So for me, it was refreshing seeing it go the other way. But before this turns into a sort of gossip show. I wanted to continue on the important notes that we've all raised about setting the scenes and looking at whether the language and whether the rhetoric match up to what's already in national climate plans. So that is what I discussed with today's expert guest speaker. Our guest speaker today is Ani Dasgupta, who is the CEO of the World Resources Institute, aka the WRI. The WRI is a huge help to Edie and to other media outlets and analysts during COPs and between them and at other international climate events. It's an independent research organisation that uses data and global reach to look at where policies stand and catalyse them for positive systemic change. So they've got deep expertise in not only the top level climate stuff, but also the specifics of food, land and water systems, urban environments and energy. So with that in mind, I asked Ani to help us demystify some of that NDC analysis coming into the COP, as well as the Tropical Forest Forever facility. And of course, I asked what would make a good COP for him. Here is that interview in full. Thank you so much for your time. How are you doing? How's Brazil?
Brazil is great. I was in Rio and I'm in Sao Paulo. Getting more excited. The Rio was very positive. Local Leaders Forum. Thank you for doing this, Sarah. I'm really appreciate it.
I appreciate you making the time during a busy couple of days travelling across Brazil. So before we chat all things COP, just for the benefit of the listeners, it would be great to hear a little bit more about what the Institute does and what specifically it'll be doing during the COP.
Yeah, so I lead the World Resource Institute. It's a global organization, working on the intersection of climate and development and nature. And so there are many organizations in our space that are actually terrific, and we work with almost all of them. I think what differentiates us are three different things. We are very focused on systems level change, like how do we change a system rather than just the outcome. We are very focused on the economic transition rather than just climate. How can we have a different economy that's good for climate, people, and nature at the same time? And we are very focused on country level transition. So most of our team, we have about 2,500 people. Most of the team is based in 14 offices across the world, like India, China, Indonesia, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, etc., and quite 5 different countries in Africa. I think in COP, we are focused on, I think our primary focus is getting a very solid outcome on finance, especially for restoration, for adaptation. We focus on reskilling. How do we make sure the transition is not only just, but people benefit from it and people have skills for the new economy. We are very focused on how do you get a systems approach to finance, not just how much grant there is, but how the whole system works to get us to transition finance. Our biggest focus is to make NDCs implementable, more sector specific, more directed. So we have a significant team here and looking forward to how the next 2 weeks go.
And I wanted to come on to those NDCs. So in the lead up to the COP, something that I noticed that the Institute has been doing a lot of is assessing the likely impact of NDCs. And people that have been following this will know that most countries did not get them in ahead of time. And some of those that were presented don't have that sector specific details. So what happens now? Is it too late for countries to present plans? And what makes a credible plan?
The countries were supposed to present their NDCs in February, and not many countries did that, and we knew that, and we talked about it. And then, and a lot of countries actually came forward during September, during the climate week. But there are still very significant countries that are still like you wrote about it. I mean, it just came out, and India. So US, India, these 3 are the big emitters next to China, right? China did come out in September. The reason you want them early, Sarah, is mostly to allow the UNFCCC and people like us to add them up and to see are we moving as a world, not a specific country. And this meeting that's taking place right now, World Leaders Summit in Belém, is to present to the world leaders where we are in the world and what do we need to do collectively to move the needle. That's the purpose of it being presented early, so allow people in the UNFCCC and us to add them up. It's never too late, Sarah. We want is to produce as ambitious as credible plans possible, and everyone would welcome as they're presented. But the dates matter simply to aggregate, because it's not just the whole point of COP is not just individual countries, right? It's how we are doing globally, and how do we need to kind of encourage each other, push each other to go forward. You asked a very good question: what makes a credible plan? Our view, and my specific view, is ambition in the plan is very important to get to 1.5 degree, but I think it's definitely not enough. What we want to see in a plan is its credibility, its implementability, and its financeability. That is it implementable? Is it to have a sectoral goal? And the plan have near-term goals, not 2050. What are we doing 2030? What are we doing 2 years from now? Because what we have observed is there's more near-term targets and near-term certainty. It allows for financing to flow. So that's what we're watching for, how credible these plans are. And the reason I think countries are taking longer, it's a small full of silver lining here, is that I think countries are now taking it much more seriously than they did. And they're having intra-governmental between different agencies. You know, not a lot of the things one agency can't do it. They need collaboration, cooperation from Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Energy, and those discussions are taking longer. But that means it's also becoming more real. And a lot of countries are finding that they have to find a politically feasible path. In the beginning, people just committed and they couldn't implement them. And this is not a terrible thing. I wish they had done it earlier so they were in time. But it's actually a good thing that these countries are taking seriously, and countries are realizing that if they give a commitment, people expect them to implement them and figure out how to finance them. So we're in that juncture right now. So we will see next few days what happens. How the people who haven't done so, how do they come out?
Got it. And I think it's important that you mentioned this politically feasible path, because the COP team this year have really said, like, this needs to be more about implementation than about talk. But equally, this year, the COP is happening at a uniquely challenging moment. In some way, multilateralism is faltering. Countries might be doing more of that planning behind the scenes, but equally, a lot are very squeezed with their international financing. So what is the right climate narrative among all of this? There's been so much talk about, you know, framing this as resiliency, but yeah, what will you be looking for in terms of how people are talking about their NDCs and getting buy-in at this moment in time?
I think one of the biggest narrative that is needed, and I feel kind of the Brazilian leadership has very much embraced it, like as the goal of what they're trying to do, is actually talk about this as the economic transition. So one of the interesting thing that happened, I think nicest thing that happened, the Brazil presidency said quite a few months back that after the COP, if it's successful, what we want to see headline is climate is the center of the economic growth and economic transition of countries. And this, I think, is a very important shift for just talking about climate and carbon to actually realizing that you can't fix just carbon. The carbon is the outcome of the economy we live in today. You know, how we eat, how we produce, how we move, everything actually has carbon in it. And actually, often the economy we live in is fueled by fossil fuel. And we need to shift our economy to an economy that is low in carbon, good for nature, and good for people. And that is the economic transition in every country. And for a lot of the large middle-income countries, this economic transition, lowering carbon and their energy security is aligned. And so one of the narrative shift that we will see that climate action is good for economic progress. The second thing we need to see is good for people. That climate action actually helps people, their quality of life, it's better quality of air, it's better jobs. We need to see more of that. I think the big thing that we are failing in is not in this commitment. You know, the actual fact is the commitments countries have made, countries, businesses, the cities already have made, not the new commitments. If they implemented everything, every commitment they have made, we would be 1 degree closer to 1.5 degree. Imagine that, 1 degree. We're at about maybe 2.8 or 2.9 degrees right now. It won't be 1.5 degree. 1 degree closer is 75% closer to the goal we need to be. And that is our implementation gap, not ambition gap. And this is where I think we're failing, the orchestrating the change we need. I published a book recently called New Global Possible that focuses on this orchestration, that how to get the outcome we want, businesses, government, and communities to work together. Financing, get permitting, get skilled labor. These things need to come together for economic transition. And that is where I think we are actually not succeeding as well we can. So I think both ambition needs to change, but this orchestration needs to change. And the last thing I'm going to say, your listeners might be interested, there will be a lot of discussion on 1.5 degrees. Or we have missed 1.5 degrees. Someone's going to come up with a report, I think, very soon that we might be heading to 1.8 degrees. And some people interpreting that, oh my God, this is lost, 1.5 degrees over, what shall we do? I think the point, 1.5 degrees is not a switch. It's a 20-year average of the Earth's temperature. Every time we actually go past or go further closer to it, it becomes that much harder, that much more expensive, and that much more difficult for humans to come back. So it means to me that we need to be actually doing more of what we're doing so that our cost of inaction, because the people who will suffer are the poor people in the world, and poor, because all of us don't suffer from climate change because we have resources to protect ourselves. And I think those are the four things in the narrative that needs to shift. And we need to actually get to the economic transition and focus on the things we are actually succeeding in and how to figure out how to scale them.
That makes sense. And I find that so much more nuanced and probably more inspiring than just what I've heard in recent months, especially from US PLC, which is just resilience, 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 and just that word.
Yeah, because we are trying to say not say climate change, I think. I think we have to be honest where we are and what we need to do. Resilience is not a bad thing. We are all for resilience. But resilience is important, but it's kind of a little bit of fatalistic that we just have to be resilient to change. We also have to not make the world warmer because there is no way to protect ourselves. I think we need to do both things at the same time because the world is becoming warmer.
Of course, and next Monday's thematic topic, well, one of them is adaptation. So I look forward to coming on to that next week in a bit more detail. But for now, I'd love to sort of wrap up this talk with you, Ani. We've talked about a lot of what needs to be in NDCs, what needs to be shifted in the narratives, and then some of the really big themes that the WRI are looking at. But if you had to put it on a postcard, what are you most hoping to see coming out of the COP in terms of maybe the official negotiations or any side agreements or future work programs? So turning everything we've talked about into a concrete commitment.
I think, Sarah, this particular COP, there are certain things that will happen in the negotiation, something will happen outside negotiation that are both important. In the negotiation, I think there are three things we are looking for. That first is finance. Baku to Belém roadmap came out, but the Brazilians been working on. Just for your listeners, in Baku last year, the rich countries committed $1.3 trillion of financial support to less rich countries by 2035. They committed their own money, multilateral development banks, bilateral governments, about $300 million. And the rest we were supposed to figure out, private capital, others. So the Baku to Belém roadmap was how do we get to $1.3 trillion from 300? And there's been a lot of discussion, actually a lot of very good discussion of innovation, private capital, how do we get guarantee facility work? So that is one big item how does that roadmap work? Second was what you just said, adaptation. We are hoping for a big outcome on adaptation, which I think is possible. The goal is to have a global goal for adaptation, but most of all, tripling the adaptation finance goal it was $40 billion before, which we haven't reached, but tripling it in the next cycle. One good news about adaptation is there's been really a lot of very good analytical work done over the last few years on adaptation. We actually published one report that's been quite a bit discussed. We looked at 300 plus investment in adaptation across the world, and each as aggregate, we found every dollar spent in adaptation has $10 in return. So that, the idea is adaptation is a sunk cost, it's just you have to put it and it's just a big hole. That's absolutely not true. The adaptation are investable, they're big returns possible across the economy, across macroeconomy and microeconomy. for people's lives. The third would be nature, which is not would not be inside the negotiation, but we are expecting a big boost for nature. And the Brazilians have put together a very innovative new instrument called TFFF, Tropical Fund Forest Forever, I think, which is a fund that's available to the whole world, tropical forest countries in the whole world that supports protecting forests. We are looking forward to that getting financed, stabilized. I think the biggest thing what we talked about outside the COP is the narrative of economic transition. So we want to see sector specificity in the commitments. So these are investable and we can make, for energy transition, for transportation, for food production, for fertilizer, so that is the kind of back 4 different things at WRI we have focused on.
Got it. So a very big to-do list and lots to keep our eyes on in the days ahead. So, Ani, unfortunately, that is all the time we do have on COP30 covered today. But thank you so much for taking the time, and I wish you a successful remainder of your COP.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm sure we will speak again before the COP is over. But thank you for your interest.
Big thank you once again to Ani for squeezing in this interview with us. I know that the WRI has a really packed calendar during the COP, so do check out their website and their newsletter to stay up to date with all things that they're up to. That is almost all the time we have for today's episode, but conscious that we're going into the weekend, I wanted to do a sort of next week preview. Next week, the COP negotiations begin in earnest, and the COP presidency also starts its sort of thematic days. So, Sidhi, can you do the honours of previewing the next couple of days at COP for us?
Yeah, I think on Monday and Tuesday, some of the main focus will probably be on just adaptation and resilience. Negotiators will also be discussing infrastructure, waterways, cities all together, and looking at from an adaptation point of view as well. Another thing to flag is circular economy. So we'll also see conversations around circular economy happening across the first 2 days. And then as we move further into Wednesday and Thursday, I think the focus kind of shifts to the social aspect of sustainability. So we'll hear more on human rights and justice and how they're interlinked with climate justice, and they will be focused on just transitions of health, workers, education, jobs, and yeah, there's a lot that I think will be happening the first 4 days, but those are some of the themes that we'll probably focus on. Yeah,
it's a really theme-heavy COP. Like in previous years, they've given each day probably 2 themes or so, but this year they've given each pair of days about 6 to 8 themes. So we're doing our best to work across them. But for this show, Monday's episode is going to be all about climate adaptation. So after more than 140 countries backed a new 30-step adaptation agenda 3 COPs ago in Egypt, we'll be asking where we are now. Also starting on Monday are the official negotiations. And Matt, you and I have been to COPs past and seen this moment where the World Leaders Summit sort of gives way to, the COP true, really. So for listeners that haven't had the privilege of going, how would you describe that sort of shift?
It's a kind of weird, eerie sense of calm kind of descends across the blue zone. All the kind of key cameras from like the national news kind of depart with the world leaders. It tends to be what happened. Kind of rock up into the blue zone and think, oh, have I got the day wrong? Is this another kind of break? You see a kind of a few journalists squirring away on laptops, and then slowly and surely the inbox starts rolling in. You'll get notifications from the UN account about what's happening, what's coming up. You're dashing around to different kind of smaller rooms to hear about a launch of something, and you go from being really kind of fixed on 1 or 2 stages or streams to your neck kind of pivoting around like an owl to see what is launching where. So it's kind of quieter but busier, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me, and I think maybe the negotiators will feel the same. But from being next to like the negotiators' tent in Glasgow, what I did notice was that the first couple of days they were keeping fairly sociable shifts. They'd be starting around 8:30, 9 a.m. Most of them would be done by, and I'm saying this is a shorter day for them because these people work super hard, would be done by about 8 p.m. you get to the end and sort of the clock loses all meaning. They're in there as close to 24 hours a day as physically possible. So it's a sort of warm-up for the official negotiations, and we won't see anything like a text until probably the midway point. So as Matt said, can be quite a strange vibe for the next few days, but interesting to follow nonetheless. But that really is everything that we have time for this episode. As I mentioned, we'll be back on Monday, and in the meantime you can visit our website edie.net for all of our written explainers and our contributed thought leadership from those at the COP. So there are already a few treats up there to tide you over for the weekend, including a COP jargon buster explaining key terminologies, and Sidhi's interviews with some UK business and political leaders on their views about how Edie's home nation can best show leadership at this COP. So do check all of that out over the weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. But until then, it's a goodbye from Matt.
Goodbye.
And it's a goodbye from Sidhi.
Goodbye.
And it's a goodbye from me. Goodbye.